So we're on chapter 22 of Heidi. Uncle went out early the next morning to see what kind of a day it was going to be. There was a reddish gold light over the higher peaks, a light breeze springing up, and the branches of the fir trees moved gently to and fro, and the sun was on its way. The old man stood and watched the green slopes under the higher peaks gradually growing brighter with the coming day, and the dark shadows lifting from the valley, until at first a rosy light filled its hollows, and then the morning gold flooded every height and depth. The sun had risen. Uncle wheeled the chair out of the shed ready for the coming journey, and then went in to call the children and tell them what a lovely sunrise it was. Peter came up at this moment. The goats did not gather round him so trustfully as usual, but seemed to avoid him timidly, for Peter had reached a high pitch of anger and bitterness, and was laying about him with his stick very unnecessarily, and where it fell the blow was no light one. For weeks now he had not had Heidi all to himself as formerly. When he came up in the morning, the invalid child was always already in her chair, and Heidi fully occupied with her, and it was the same thing over again when he came down in the evening. She had not come out with the goats once this summer, and now, today, she was only coming in company with her friend in the chair, and would stick by the latter's side the whole time. It was the thought of this which was making him particularly cross this morning. There stood the chair on its high wheels. Peter seemed to see something proud and disdainful about it, and he glared at it as at an enemy that had done him harm and was likely to do him more still today. He glanced around. There was no sound anywhere, no one to see him. He sprang forward like a wild creature, caught hold of it, and gave it a violent and angry push in the direction of the slope. The chair rolled swiftly forward, and in another minute had disappeared. Peter now sped up the mountain as if on wings, not pausing till he was well in shelter of a large blackberry bush, for he had no wish to be seen by Uncle. But he was anxious to see what had become of the chair, and his bush was well placed for that. Himself hidden, he could watch what happened below and see what Uncle did without being discovered himself. So he looked, and there he saw his enemy running faster and faster downhill. Then it turned head over heels several times, and finally, after one great bound, rolled over and over to its complete destruction. The pieces flew in every direction, feet, arms, and torn fragments of the padded seat and bolster, and Peter experienced a feeling of such unbounded delight at the sight that he leapt in the air, laughing aloud and stamping for joy. Then he took a run round, jumping over bushes on the way, only to return to the same spot and fall into fresh fits of laughter. He was beside himself with satisfaction, for he could see only good results for himself in this disaster to his enemy. Now Heidi's friend would be obliged to go away, for she would have no means of going about. And when Heidi was alone again, she would come out with him as in the old days, and everything would go on in the proper way again. But Peter did not consider, or did not know, that when we do a wrong thing, trouble is sure to follow. Heidi now came running out of the hut and round to the shed. Grandfather was behind with Clara in his arms. The shed stood wide open, the two loose planks having been taken down, and it was quite light inside. Heidi looked into every corner and ran from one end to the other, and then stood still, wondering what could have happened to the chair. Grandfather now came up. "How is this? Have you wheeled the chair away, Heidi?" "I've been looking everywhere for it, Grandfather. You said it was standing ready outside." And she again searched each corner of the shed with her eyes. At that moment, the wind, which had risen suddenly, blew open the shed door and sent it banging back against the wall. "It must have been the wind, Grandfather," exclaimed Heidi, and her eyes grew anxious at this sudden discovery. "Oh, if it has blown the chair all the way down to Dorfley, we shall not get it back in time and shall not be able to go." "If it has rolled as far as that, it will never come back, for it is in 100 pieces by now," said the grandfather, going round the corner and looking down. "But it's a curious thing to have happened," he added as he thought over the matter, "for the chair would have had to turn a corner before starting downhill. "Oh, I am sorry," lamented Clara, "for we shall not be able to go today, or perhaps any other day. I shall have to go home, I suppose, if I have no chair. Oh, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry." But Heidi looked towards her grandfather with her usual expression of confidence. "Grandfather, you will be able to do something, won't you, so that it need not be as Clara says, and so that she is not obliged to go home?" "Well, for the present, we will go up the mountain as we had arranged, and then later on we will see what can be done," he answered, much to the children's delight. He went indoors, fetched out a pile of shawls, and laying them on the sunniest spot he could find, set Clara down upon them. Then he fetched the children's morning milk and had out his 2 goats. "Why is Peter not here yet?" thought Uncle to himself, for Peter's whistle had not been sounded that morning. The grandfather now took Clara up on one arm and the shawls on the other. "Now then, we will start," he said. "The goats can come with us." Heidi was pleased at this and walked on after her grandfather with an arm over either of the goats' necks, and the animals were so overjoyed to have her again that they nearly squeezed her flat between them out of sheer affection. When they reached the spot where the goats usually pastured, they were surprised to find them already feeding there, climbing about the rocks, and Peter with them, lying his full length on the ground. "I'll teach you another time to go by like that, you lazy rascal. What do you mean by it?" Uncle called to him. Peter, recognizing the voice, jumped up like a shot. "No one was up," he answered. "Have you seen anything of the chair?" asked the grandfather. "Of what chair?" called Peter, back in answer in a morose tone of voice. Uncle said no more. He spread the shawls on the sunny slope, and setting Clara upon them, asked if she was comfortable. "As comfortable as in my chair," she said, thanking him. "And this seems the most beautiful spot. Oh, Heidi, it is lovely, so lovely," she cried, looking around her with delight. The grandfather prepared to leave them. They would now be safe and happy together, he said, and when it was time for dinner, Heidi was to go and fetch the bag from the shady hollow where he had put it. Peter was to bring them as much milk as they wanted, but Heidi was to see that it was little swan's milk. He would come and fetch them towards evening. He must now be off to see after the chair and ascertain what had become of it. The sky was dark blue, and not a single cloud was to be seen from one horizon to the other. The great snowfield overhead sparkled as if set with thousands and thousands of gold and silver stars. The 2 gray mountains' peaks lifted their lofty heads against the sky and looked solemnly down upon the valley as of old. The great bird was poised aloft in the clear blue air, and the mountain wind came over the heights and blew refreshingly around the children as they sat on the sunlit slope. It was all indescribably enjoyable to Clara and Heidi. Now and again, a young goat came and lay down beside them. Snowflake came oftenest, putting her little head down near Heidi and only moving because another goat came and drove her away. Clara had learned to know them all so well that she never mistook one for the other now, for each had an expression and ways of its own. And the goats had also grown familiar with Clara and would rub their heads against her shoulder, which was always a sign of acquaintanceship and goodwill. Some hours went by, and Heidi began to think that she might just go over to the spot where all the flowers grew to see if they were fully blown and looking as lovely as the year before. Clara could not go until Grandfather came back that evening, when the flowers probably would be already closed. The longing to go became stronger and stronger till she felt she could not resist it. "Would you think me unkind, Clara," she said rather hesitatingly, "if I left you for a few minutes? I should run there and back very quickly. I want so to see how the flowers are looking." But wait, for an idea had come into Heidi's head. She ran and picked a bunch or 2 of green leaves and then took hold of Snowflake and led her up to Clara. "There, now you will not be alone," said Heidi, giving the goat a little push to show her she was to lie down near Clara, which the animal quite understood. Heidi threw the leaves into Clara's lap, and the latter told her friend to go at once to look at the flowers, as she was quite happy to be left with the goat. She liked this new experience. Heidi ran off, and Clara began to hold out the leaves one by one to Snowflake, who snoozled up to her new friend in a confiding manner and slowly ate the leaves from her hand. It was easy to see that Snowflake enjoyed this peaceful and sheltered way of feeding, for when with the other goats she had much persecution to endure from the larger and stronger ones of the flock. And Clara found a strange new pleasure in sitting all alone like this on the mountainside, her only companion a little goat that looked to her for protection. She suddenly felt a great desire to be her own mistress and to be able to help others instead of herself being always dependent as she was now. Many thoughts, unknown to her before, came crowding into her mind, and a longing to go on living in the sunshine and to be doing something that would bring happiness to another, as now she was helping to make the goat happy. An unaccustomed feeling of joy took possession of her, as if everything she had ever known or felt became all at once more beautiful, and she seemed to see all things in a new light. And so strong was the sense of this new beauty and happiness that she threw her arms around the little goat's neck and exclaimed, "Oh, Snowflake, how delightful it is up here! If only I could stay here forever with you beside me." Heidi had meanwhile reached her field of flowers, and as she caught sight of it, she uttered a cry of joy. The whole ground in front of her was a mass of shimmering gold, where the sisters... Oh, I'm so sorry, I lost my place. Where the cistus flowers spread their yellow blossoms. Above them waved whole bushes of the deep blue bellflowers, while the fragrance that arose from the whole sunlit expanse was as if the rarest balsam had been flung over it. The scent, however, came from the small brown flowers, the little round heads of which rose modestly here and there among the yellow blossoms. Heidi stood and gazed and drew in the delicious air. Suddenly, she turned round and reached Clara's side, out of breath with running and excitement. "Oh, you must come," she called out as soon as she came in sight. "It is more beautiful than you can imagine, and perhaps this evening it may not be so lovely. I believe I could carry you. Don't you think I could?" Clara looked at her and shook her head. "Why, Heidi, what can you be thinking of? You are smaller than I am." "Oh, if only I could walk." Heidi looked round as if in search of something. Some new idea had evidently come into her head. Peter was sitting up above, looking down on the two children. He had been sitting and staring before him in the same way for hours, as if he could not make out what he saw. He had destroyed the chair so that the friend might not be able to move anywhere, and that her visit might come to an end. And then, a little while after, she had appeared right up here under his very nose with Heidi beside her. He thought his eyes must deceive him, and yet there she was, and no mistake about it. Heidi now looked up to where he was sitting and called out in a peremptory voice, "Peter, come down here." "I don't wish to come," he called in reply. "But you are to, you must. I cannot do it alone, and you must come here and help me. Make haste and come down," she called again in an urgent voice. "I shall do nothing of the kind," was the answer. Heidi ran some way up the slope towards him, and then pausing, called again, her eyes ablaze with anger. "If you don't come at once, Peter, I will do something to you that you won't like. I mean what I say." Peter felt an inward throe at these words, and a great fear seized him. He had done something wicked which he wanted no one to know about, and so far he had thought himself safe. But now Heidi spoke exactly as if she knew everything, and whatever she did know, she would tell her grandfather, and there was no one he feared so much as this latter person. Supposing he were to suspect what had happened about the chair, Peter's anguish of mind grew more acute. He stood up and went down to where Heidi was waiting. "I'm coming, and you won't do what you said." Peter appeared now so submissive with fear that Heidi felt quite sorry for him and answered assuringly, No, of course not. Come along with me. There is nothing to be afraid of in what I want you to do." We're going to stop right there, and we'll pick up for the rest of that chapter tomorrow.